Hello, I'm Irina K, a Vedic astrologer and researcher of hidden architecture of the human psyche. This series, Astrological Profiling of Serial Killers, Patterns for Psychology and Criminal Investigation, is not about glorifying horror or feeding curiosity about violence. It's about understanding how consciousness can fracture, how celestial patterns, psychological trauma, and environmental triggers can converge to create human darkness. It's in a way an astrological autopsy, the dissection of a broken psyche through the map of the stars. I approach each case as both astrologer and investigator. Before learning the crimes, I study the chart as if it belonged to an ordinary person, searching for emotional signatures, karmic fractures, and thymic patterns that psychology would later confirm. Again and again, I find the same patterns repeating: afflicted moons, Saturnian domination, wounded Venus, and Ketu pulling the soul away from empathy. Through this work, I seek not sensationalism, but prevention. I'm on a mission to offer astrology as an additional diagnostic and timing tool, something that one day could help psychologists recognize risk earlier and intervene before tragedy occurs. Just as the lie detector once revolutionized investigation, I believe astrology can offer its own subtle form of truth detection. Each chart in this series is a mirror, showing what happens when the human soul loses its connection to light or even splits, previewing its darker reincarnation. When planetary energies that could have become discipline, insight, or transformation harden instead into obsession and delusion. By reading these patterns with precision and compassion, we'll learn not only about the killers, but about the fragile boundary between sanity and madness that lives inside every human being. And in this episode, we are going to make an astrological autopsy to Edward Gein, or Ed Gein. This is what inspired me to check his chart is the Breaking Records, nowadays Netflix TV show about him. And traditionally, I'm starting by reading words of Ted Bundy, something that pushed me towards doing research in astrological analysis of charts of serial killers. We want to be able to say that we can identify these dangerous people, and the really scary thing is you can't identify them. People don't realize that there are potential killers among them. How could anyone live in a society where people they liked, loved, lived with, worked with, and admired could the next day turn out to be the most demonic people imaginable? Ted Bundy, I'm taking your challenge, and with the help of astrology and teachings that are more than 3,000 years old, I want to prove that astrology can and should help governments to prevent future crimes. And another phrase that really helped me to keep going is by Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Let's do something. And as an astrologer, this is what I can do. So, TV show on Netflix, Breaking Records, and it's done so well, so graphic that it's very hard to watch. Don't watch it before sleep. I stopped more or less after the second episode. Why I broke my algorithm of work this time? Because his date of birth is not 100% accurate. Like for example, Menendez, we have his birth certificate. I believe Jeffrey Dahmer, Gacy. We can find their exact birth time and check more or less accurately their chart. For me, as a Vedic astrologer, I use multiple divisional charts and all the tools that needs to be that used for very deep analysis. It's very sensitive and it demands accurate time of birth, sometimes up to the minute. So in this case, I found his time of birth as 11:30 p.m., but I moved it a little bit because based on my some Western astrologer suggested this 11:30 p.m., but I moved it a little bit. And why I did it, because based on the timing of his father death, mother death, brother death, and his imprisonment, the time of imprison, I'm sure that the time is around 9:45. Of course, would be nice to have his birth certificate in hand. Now, this is yet another fragmented psyche. As per Rudolf Steiner, I made a little short video about that. I really like the whole concept of that. That the soul before reincarnation, before and after, as per Rudolf Steiner, it can review the future life or past life. And sometimes it is so harsh, the abuse, the trauma, that the soul hesitates to incarnate. And then that's where a split of soul or split of consciousness can happen. And I see this fractured psyche in not almost, all charts that I have been analyzing. They all have this very harsh duality. And here, normally I would start by checking his moon nakshatra to check under which influence the person was, his childhood, what influence he had during his childhood. But in this case, I decided to start my analysis from Lagna. So we see that ascendant here, as per my rectified time, is Aries, and it's in nakshatra Kritika ruled by Sun. The symbol of Kritika is knife, and it is symbol of purification, but also it is symbol of cutting, separating, burning away what is impure. Who had the prominent Kritika? Right, the vampire of Hanover, the Fritz Harman, the previous my case. So in both cases, it becomes almost literal. The very rising point of the chart carries the signature of dissection and purification through destruction. Of course, again, a little disclaimer, as I always say, if you take one position or one significator of the whole chart, and find it in your own or your loved ones. It doesn't mean that it's a 100% sign that there's someone bad around you. It should be viewed, the whole chart is an ecosystem. We view the chart as ecosystem, and there's like so many different aspects, positions that should be viewed. So only one is not gonna tell us anything. Every position that I'm stating here, every planet, they can be manifested on the high vibrational frequency, on the positive side. So this is something to keep in mind before we continue. Now, what I see very often, and why this Lagna resonates with me the most for Ed Gein, is that Saturn, very strong, is having under his control all key points of the chart. So he, even though the ruler of nakshatra is Sun, even though Mars has no, from the first view, connection to Saturn, but Saturn here dominates everything. It's aspecting Lagna, it's aspecting Moon and Lagnesh. No, here it's not. Here it's aspecting Sun. But in other charts, we will see that Sun is also very tightly connected with Mars. In other divisional charts, I mean, in this exact his natal chart, in other sub charts. So there is almost no space for light to pass. In Navamsha. Navamsha is one of the main charts that needs to be watched together with Rasi, and here Saturn exactly with Mars. So here we see its connection, and it's in Parivartana with exchange sign with Jupiter. It's of course strengthening both of them. Also, Jupiter is a little helping force that aspecting Saturn in the Rasi chart. But we will see later, because here, for example, Jupiter is debilitated, although he's in exchange, which of course making him stronger. So here, how to translate this into the everyday language is Jupiter and Saturn, they are connected together, welding together, and the moral teacher, which is Jupiter, and the punisher, which is Saturn, are locked in mutual bondage. So Saturn's lesson becomes distorted, and Jupiter's compassion becomes caged or also distorted. And this produces this psyche where the father archetype, also we see that Saturn is in very tight in degree opposition, so it's within 8-degree orb. It's in tight opposition with Sun. So the father archetype becomes the judge, that superego is so rigid that it slices through the self. The person lives under a constant inner tribunal. Constant guilt, punishment, and self-surveillance dominate. In Steiner's term, the I organization fractures under excessive Saturnian weight. Moral for form suppresses warmth. Psychologically speaking, that can be hyper control, masking a terror of chaos, inner critic stronger than a life instinct. And a knife, again, going back to knife becomes the tool and weapon, the only way to feel mastery over disintegration. And now we go to moon. Moon here is Scorpio. It's debilitated. It's in the worst 8th house. And it's a ruler of the 4th house of his mother. So also Saturn, I already mentioned, it's affecting it. And emotionally, it's directly showing us that there's a trauma bond with mother. Because it's 8th house, child learns from early on that from early childhood that feelings are dangerous and must be buried. Those deep feelings, they should be locked and to be hidden away. 8th house moon produces this fascination with death, decay, and what is hidden. But in debilitation, that curiosity can become possession by the underworld. In the parallel reality where, for example, how it can be transformed into the high vibrational frequency, this person, if he would work with his psyche, with a therapist, he would be able even to become a great psychotherapist himself, a healer. But in this case, something more perverted and disturbed happened. What is very important to notice here, and I will speak a lot later about moon as because it has so many different other afflictions, but it is also in isolation. When you see isolated moon, there's no planets, personal planets. Uranus is not counting. It can describe this emotional loneliness. But when it's highly afflicted, it can also point towards mental disorders, mental fluctuations, sometimes autism, emotional autism. In Navamsha, moon here in Aquarius. And because it's ruler of the 8th house, it ties again to the topics of the 8th house, which is inherited karmic heaviness. Psychologically speaking, it is dissociation, schizoid detachment, emotional numbness, empathy distorted into necrophilic longing, trying to feel through corpses what the living never gave. And we all know that from the story about Ed Gein, he was very isolated. They were living in this huge farm, and he didn't have any friends. The only mother who was very dominating figure in his life, speaking very harsh to him and creating this inner voice that he was trying to replicate even after she died. Let's view the 4th house here. 4th house is a symbol of mother, inner home, emotional ground, inner happiness, and it's all becomes very corrupted. It's becomes a site of rot and secrecy. Mars, the sun itself, the Ad, because it's a Lagnesh, entangled with the devouring maternal serpent of Ashlesha. So both Rahu, Mercury, and Mars in the 4th house are in Sarpadrakana and in Ashlesha, which rules Mercury. And Mars here in exchange with the moon, with the 8th house. So there's a direct connection between mother and son again. Speaking of Ashlesha here, it's becoming this entanglement, obsession, and psychic toxicity. And the heavily afflicted fourth house becomes this decaying, literally, farmhouse, the mummified mother's room, the private altar to death. Also, the fourth house and moon, it's how we build our inner dialogue within us, inner voice. And here it is entangled heavily with the moon, with the mother, and with the eighth house topics. This breeds psychic structure where love and disgust intertwine, sexuality fuses with guilt, tenderness with aggression. In Jungian language, an unresolved mother complex generating obsessive ritualization, an attempt to recreate the lost maternal body through control and mutilation. Just going over again all the personal planets, we see how it is interconnected with the fourth house and eighth house, and it's a mother's psychological dominion. So Saturn's grip on both Lagna and Moon shows, and Sun, shows domination by moral repression and fear of sin. The mother's image, Moon, becomes the punitive voice of God. Affection equates to contamination. Mars, ruling the self, internalizes the persecution and turns it outward. And the result is killer who tries to resurrect the mothers while destroying her image in every woman. So again, Steiner's split soul appears here. The personal I drowned in the astral memory of the mother, and the individuality devoured by ancestral moralism. The Jupiter-Saturn connection here. Jupiter is the planet that offers conscience and faith, and it is hammed by Pluto and Neptune and under direct opposition with Uranus retrograde from the ninth house. So all outer planet is affecting Jupiter. This enlightenment, so the enlightenment that Jupiter can provide and would love to provide, becoming surrounded by chaos. The nakshatra lord, Jupiter is in Ardra nakshatra, which symbol is tear. And the ruler of this nakshatra in the fourth house, again, tying this to mother, to home, and Rahu becomes again hijacked because it's with debilitated Mars, and that is with Parivartana, with the moon in 8th house. The wisdom principle becomes hijacked by compulsion. In D60, Jupiter is exalted here. And in the opposition with Venus. But even here, it's under the aspect of Saturn again. So this connection of Jupiter, very, very afflicted, giving aspect to Saturn. Initially, Jupiter already under the effect of Saturn, so it has no real source of good power. So Ishtabala of Jupiter is lower. It's not extremely low, but it's lower than it could be. And therefore, the higher self cannot radiate. It flickers behind karmic smoke. So in spiritual psychology, this equals to moral inversion. The divine light reflected through a black, distorted, or cracked, broken mirror. He seeks purification with his sun as a ascendant nakshatra ruler, Kritika, but through Saturnian denial and therefore cleansing by destruction. The result, a consciousness that seeks purification through decay. The Kritika fire turned inward. Saturn here dominates, Moon collapses, and the Mars that becomes surgeon and killer operates from within the heart of home, from within the heart of psyche. Clinical psychoanalytical summary. What can it be? From a clinical lens, this chart reflects a classic schizo-obsessive personality structure with necrophilic fixation rooted in severe maternal introject. The debilitated moon in 8th house, isolated and under Saturn's control, indicates early affective deprivation and emotional neglect, leading to possibly leading to alexithymia, inability to process or articulate feelings. Saturn, having all the power in its hands, in its claws, forms a harsh superego complex. This internal punishing parent that annihilates spontaneity and channels aggression inward until it seeks release through symbolic or literal dismemberment. Clinically, this corresponds to psychotic disorganization with obsessive ritual features and dominant maternal delusional system in which the drive for union with the lost mother becomes enacted as a morbid reconstruction of the body, a pathological attempt to restore wholeness to a split self. He was born in lunar day 9th lunar day Navami, and it's waxing moon, but it's ruled by Saturn again. So even here, Saturn has his grasp. And the vibration of this Tidhi, it's linked to Durga Navami. It's the goddess that slays the demon. The moment when the divine restraint must destroy distortion. So when it's ruled by Saturn, and the Saturn is having everything under control in this chart, it intensifies themes of austerity, karmic burden, fear, and moral rigidity. In a healthy psyche, Saturn ruled Tidhi Navami can produce deep endurance and moral clarity. In a chart already dominated by debilitated moon and heavy Saturn aspects, it turns punitive. Emotional life becomes a battlefield between duty and desire. The internal Durga principle, which is purifier, turns inward. Saturn also retrograde, so literally turns inward, attacking the self rather than the demons outside. So therefore, it needs to create demon inside, because then who else it will be attacking? Saturn's rulership here fuses guilt with necessity. One feels compelled to destroy in order to cleanse. So psychologically, the Tidhi also corresponds to an inner siege state. The ego, sun, and moon emotions are constantly under pressure of Saturn, retrograde, to under pressure to expel what feels impure. The result is a compulsive oscillation between moral obsession and violent purgation. The Navami urge to cut away darkness, literalized through, again, Kritika's knife symbolism. Spiritually, Navami represents the crisis before resolution, the ninth day when the goddess is most fierce. In Ed Gein's case, the fierce energy lacked a conscious outlet of devotion or transformation, so Saturn's Navami became a self-devouring penance. Now going a little bit more deeper and a little bit more advanced in analyzing the chart. There are things that called Mandi and Gulika, and they are kids of Saturn. There are two key points that can deepen the pathology in any chart, and especially this chart. And we see that Mandi is in Aries and Gulika is in Pisces. So therefore, Jupiter becoming a ruler of Jupiter becoming the ruler of Mandi, and the planet of wisdom and conscience, its moral and empathetic functions are contaminated by heaviness and despair. So there's another linkage to link to Saturn, between Jupiter and Saturn. Mandi is amplifier, amplifies inertia, guilt, and psychological numbness. This is just to add to already being heavily afflicted Jupiter here. Also, Jupiter here rules the best house, the ninth house. But after all these afflictions, I guess this becomes very weak, this rulership. And instead of becoming the compassionate guide and moral compass, Jupiter turns into a morbid theologian, obsessed with sin, impurity, and punishment. It erodes faith in redemption, producing a kind of spiritual nihilism, the conviction that salvation can only come through suffering. Now, Gulika is ruled by Mars. It's in the first house. And it's another poisonous kid of Saturn. It functions like a psychic parasite, an obsessive residue of unresolved aggression. It's ruled by Mars, and Mars is already debilitated in the fourth house on the Rahu-Ketu axis, and it's suspecting Saturn. So this combination gives sadistic fixation and compulsive repetition. Mark 6 to act, and Gulika infects the impulse with perversion. It externalizes inner corrosion as ritualized violence, a literal embodiment of poison in the blood. So together, these 2 points create another Saturnian influence on both Lagnesh and the moral compass of the person. Psychologically, this forms an introjected punitive system, a psyche looping between the guilt and compulsion, with no functioning mediator to restore meaning or empathy. Now, going even deeper into the moon's analysis, why it's even more afflicted than what we see from the first glance. It is occupying Karesh degrees in both Drekana and Navamsha. the 26th degree of Scorpio. In classical Jyotisha, the Karesh planet signifies a destroyer or afflictor and the one that consumes vitality and peace of mind. When the moon itself becomes Karesh or falls in the Karesh portion of divisional charts, the native's emotional body becomes both victim and perpetrator of psychic erosion. So his psyche is an enemy to himself, in a plain word. In practical psychological terms, this can manifest as self-undoing through emotion, feelings that turn toxic when expressed. Inverted empathy, sensitivity so extreme that it transforms into fear or hostility. And mood disintegration. The boundary between imagination and perception dissolves, allowing delusional material to flow freely. In Drekana, moon what do we see? Also in 8th house. So it governs this instinctive reactions and survival memory. In Navamsha, it's in the 3rd house, ruler also of 8th house. 8th house everywhere. So, and having Karesh influence tied so close together with the 8th house everywhere, it reflects the deeper, it repeats across all layers one important pattern that the astral body cannot stabilize. So moon in this chart governs Cancer, and it also governs 4 important upagrahas. They are sensitive mathematical points describing karmic reversals and danger thresholds in classical Jyotish. So Vyatipata, its extreme polarity or a moral inversion, its experiences of purity and impurity. Upaketu, the false light. Mrityu, death knot. Ardha prahara, the chronic internalized conflict and self-wounding impulses. By ruling this stellium of upagrahas, moon becomes the lord of unconscious theater where all shadow complexes are staged. In psychological terminology, it can be affective dissonance, emotions charged with both tenderness and violence, fanatic drive, libido merged with a death instinct, and false transcendence, attempts to reach purity through annihilation. Since the moon is already debilitated in the Rasi, it's in Karesh degrees in the Drekana and Navamsha. It is ruler of 8 houses in a lot of divisional charts. It's under the Saturn's aspect. It's ruler of this upagrahas. It all becomes a battleground. This explains the pervasive necrophilic and purgative themes in his psychology. The literal acting out of the lunar rulership over death-coded poems. Like, this still is not enough. Moon is also rules Saham's Kali and Bandhana. Kali Saham points to periods of confrontation with destructive or demonic forces. Literally, moments when repressed instincts breaks through form. This is important to remember that Sahams are active during the periods. And I will discuss this a little bit later. And Bandhana Saham marks bondage, confinement, entrapment, both physical and psychological. Now, it shows the channels of destruction and imprisonment originate from the emotional body itself. So moon becomes the internal warden and the prisoner at once. Now, it's the mind caught in trauma punishment feedback cycle, each eruption of feeling followed by self-repression and guilt. In psychological language, this is a matrix of reenactment where the psyche compulsively restages the original wound to maintain psychic coherence. So it's a constant trauma replay. Now, just a little step away from Moon before we go back to Moon. Ed Gein, first major planetary period started in Mercury. Let's go back directly to the Ketu. In Ketu here in Nakshatra Shravana. This is when it gets afflicted. The Shravana is seen in charts of many people with schizophrenia, people who hear voices. Because Shravana symbol is ear, it governs listening, inner voices, and the transmission of hidden teachings on the high vibrational frequency. When Ketu, the planet of separation, detachment, and ancestral memory, occupies Shravana, the native hears not the outer world, but the echo of the invisible. Because Ketu sits in Capricorn, it is directly tied to the chart's dominant ruler, Saturn again, because Saturn becomes dispositor. And so, therefore, from the very beginning of life, Ketu acts as the messenger and agent of Saturn, acting here as a black sun, a cold, moral, and spectral dimension. And black sun is a shadow aspect of consciousness that seeks purification through negation. Psychologically, this period establishes a pattern of detached observation turning into obsessive inner commentary. So Shravana's sensitivity becomes hyper-receptivity. Instead of listening to wisdom, the mind starts to absorb echoes of its own fear and guilt. In symbolic terms, this Ketu-Saturn link, again, it forms a dark initiation. The ear that once listened for the divine begins the one that hear to the underworld. Back to Moon and to Dasha periods, planetary Dasha's period. His chart is a candidate for both Vimshottari and Ashtotari Dasha system, and I tend to use both of them when applicable. And it gives more tools and give a chance to view chart from different angles. So we know that the darkest period of his life was from 1947 until 1952, when he started digging graves. So first and foremost, I want to point something that is really important, that is like not astrology at all directly. The fact that if he was never able to see photos of Nazi and their beast actions, what if Edward would never be exposed to that pure evil darkness? This comic book with that lady, murderer and monster, the seed would never be planted in his weak and sick mind, and therefore maybe it would never grow into anything terrible. The same with Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer or Gacy. They all, in interview, they all emphasize that no, it's not because I did this, not because of the abuse in the childhood, or not, it's not because of the pornography or photos or whatever. But what if their sensitive psyche actually directly gets affected by it? And in clinical psychology and trauma research, both show that exposure to extreme imagery or violence can act as a secondary trauma for individuals with fragile ego boundaries or latent psychotic tendencies. What reaches most people as shocking information may, in highly impressionable mind, be experienced as an intrusive reality. The nervous system cannot distinguish between what is witnessed and what is personally enacted. The material becomes absorbed into the inner world and begins to replay as an internal command. In such personalities, there is often a phenomenon called projective identification. The psyche identifies with the aggressor to gain a sense of mastery over unbearable fear. When the moral and emotional regulators, symbolized in his chart by afflicted moon and Saturn's domination, are already weakened, the person may reenact what was seen as a way to control the terror it provoked. Those external exposure functions not as a cause, but as a catalyst that organizes existing fragmentation into specific imagery and behavior. The seed, as you know, the seed was already present. The environment merely gave it form, language, and script. This aligns with a modern understanding of gene-environment interaction in psychosis, a vulnerable temperament meeting a traumatic symbol. Now, from astrological point of view, 1947, we're going to use Vimshottari Dasha, Chara Dasha, and Ashtotari Dasha, 3 dashas, and it's almost hard to imagine that it is such a coincidence that during Dasha period, Vimshottari, it was moon period from 47 to 52. We remember how heavily afflicted this moon here. In Ashtotari Dasha, what do we see here? Rahu moon when it started. And Chara Dasha, it is Scorpio period, I remember. Scorpio, it's the beginning of Scorpio. So, in Jaimini, containing moon, right? And Scorpio in the first house. In Vimshottari, it's also moon Mahadasha. In Ashtotari is Rahu moon, repeating the same lunar affliction through shadow association. So statistically, such a triple resonance is extraordinary for me as astrologer. Symbolically, it means that ego, emotional, and karmic was tuned into the same wounded frequency. And this is why years 1947 to 1952 mark the descent into the underworld of his own psyche and into the descent into the graves of other people. From a clinical perspective, periods of intensified lunar symbolism, heavily afflicted lunar symbolism, times when the natal moon and its harmonics are repeatedly triggered, correspond to phases of heightened emotional permeability. During such windows, the individual's boundary between inner and outer reality becomes thin. Imagery, suggestion, and collective fear can penetrate deeply. His Jupiter is under all outer planets, so it's a collective karma pushing onto his moral grounds. In a therapeutic context, this would be the moment to focus on grounding, containment, and really testing rather than confrontation or moralization. Early signs often include withdrawal, auditory hypersensitivity, fixation on purity or contamination, and fascination with death or decay, all signals that the lunar body is overstimulated. Intervention at this stage through structured routine, sensory regulation, and compassionate cognitive framing can prevent the psyche from collapsing into symbolic literalism. In broader social terms, this understanding suggests that media exposure and violent iconography can act as psychological transits, triggering latent material in sensitive minds. Astrology, when used responsibly, could therefore serve as an early warning timing model helping clinicians and caregivers recognize when the person's emotional membrane is most vulnerable and provide protective context before destructive imagery takes root. Before going to reflection and closing section, I want to also point out to the transits. So in 1947, in the beginning of the year, we see very heavy combination. First of all, Jupiter, that is supposed to be his moral compass, but it's very afflicted, as we already mentioned, and it's giving a glance to the first house, to the Lagna itself. Therefore, it's flooding his consciousness with distorted ideas. Now, both Venus, Mars, Venus is Karesh. So, Venus is in his chart debilitated, and in transit chart, it's going over again Karesh degrees. Mars is aspecting with his 7 aspect his Jupiter, giving ideas of aggression. And Saturn going over his natal Lagnesh and Mars. So there's no benefic counterbalance here, and the usual protective aspects of Jupiter or Moon are absent. Psychologically, this planetary pattern reflects a total saturation of the conscience system by Saturnian content, guilt, isolation, and the fantasy of purification through decay. In such configurations, the psyche can lose its ability to symbolize, instead it literalizes. The inner myth of cleansing becomes enacted in physical form. Like when we look at charts like Ed Gein's, the goal is not condemnation or morbid fascination, but understanding. Astrology can reveal when a person's emotional field becomes dangerously thin, when Saturn's pressure, Rahu's distortion, or Moon's fragility converge into a single vulnerable phase. If such signatures were recognized in time, they could alert psychologists, teachers, or families to the need of stabilization and care. In this sense, astrology becomes a form of preventive psychology, a symbolic early warning system that identifies periods when reality testing is weakest and environmental influence most potent. Used ethically, it could complement modern clinical practice, not to label but to time compassion, to know when the soul is most exposed to the collective shadow. By learning to read these rhythms, we can begin to transform what once produced destruction into opportunities for healing and reintegration, turning the same lunar currents that once whispered darkness into channels of awareness and protection. Thank you for watching. I do really hope that I will be able to look away from the serial killers and from all the stories after I finish. What really also a little stuck to me from these 2 episodes that I watched, when the actor saying directly in the camera, you are the one who can't look away. This line is delivered during a sequence that draws a connection between Gein's crimes and the Hollywood horror films they inspired, particularly Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. I think it forces the audience to confront their own morbid curiosity. Instead of simply portraying Gein as a monster, the show makes the viewer a participant in the exploitation of his story. The show suggests that the public's obsession with true crime stories is part of a larger systemic fascination with depravity and violence. This is something to think about. Okay, thank you for watching and see you in the next video.